I turned 66 on a Thursday that didn't feel like much of anything. No milestone, no party. Just me, a chipped mug of black coffee, and the creak of the porch swing outside my house in Ash Hollow. The kind of quiet morning you only get in a town too small to be busy and too old to change. The grass was already turning brown again, no matter how much I watered it. I sat there watching the sun spill across the trees, pretending it didn't bother me that the phone hadn't rung. My name is Lorraine Whitford, and you're listening to this story on Renvenge Zinnia, where truths that once got buried finally get told, in the voices of those who live them. It had been 3 years since I'd heard from Julian, my only son. Not a call when I had pneumonia, not a card when my sister passed, just silence, like I'd been erased. So when the knock came, one soft thud, then nothing, I almost didn't get up. But on the welcome mat, there it was, a plain brown box tied with a single blue ribbon. I knew that handwriting instantly. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, were cookies, dozens of them, each iced by hand. No note, just a card taped to the lid. Happy birthday, Mom. Let's start over. I didn't touch the cookies, not because I didn't want to. Lord knows I used to bake every Saturday when Julian was little. He always asked for the oatmeal ones with the chocolate drizzle. But when I lifted the lid and saw those cookies, hand-iced and delicate, arranged like jewels in a tissue-lined box, my fingers froze. It wasn't revulsion. It was something more complicated, like picking up something too precious and too dangerous at once. They were beautiful. That's the thing. Tiny blue wildflowers piped on lemon rounds, leaf-shaped ones dusted with gold shimmer, even a few star-shaped cookies with sugar so fine it looked like frost. But he'd never baked a thing in his life. Julian was the kind of boy who refused to crack an egg if it wasn't measured into a recipe he'd designed himself. That box didn't say homemade, it said controlled. I sat at the kitchen table, hands folded in my lap like I was waiting for an apology to arrive by mail. For years, I'd imagined what it would feel like if he ever reached out. I played it over in my mind during the worst nights. Me in a hospital bed, maybe, or on Christmas Eve, or the anniversary of his father's death. I'd picture him knocking on the door, sheepish but sincere, maybe holding a plant, or a photograph, or just a few words that made it feel less like I'd been erased, but a box of cookies. No letter, no voice, just sugar and precision. My stomach turned. I reheated my coffee, but it tasted bitter. Not from the grounds, I knew that taste, but from something lower in the throat. Something sour and quiet. I carried the box from room to room like it might tell me where it belonged. Set it on the hallway credenza, picked it up, moved it to the coffee table, tried pretending it was just a thoughtful gesture, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was holding something unfinished, like a conversation that started at the wrong end. In the end, I slipped one cookie, just one, a round one with pale blue violets, into a small plastic container and put it in the fridge. I told myself it was for later, a small kindness I might one day allow myself. But if I'm being honest, I saved it like someone saves evidence. The rest, I repacked as neatly as I could, tied the ribbon back in a way that didn't quite match the original. My fingers weren't made for that kind of symmetry anymore. I glanced at the clock. 2:07 p.m. Martha Kellerman lived 15 minutes away, Julian's mother-in-law, a good woman. One of the very few who never made me feel like an ex when Julian started pulling away. She still sent a card each year, always handwritten, always signed, "Thinking of you, Martha." At Julian and Clara's wedding, she was the one who sat next to me when the seating chart accidentally placed me by the kitchen. If anyone deserved a box of hand-decorated cookies, it was her. And if I'm being painfully honest, it was easier to hand that gift to someone else than to keep wondering what it meant for me. I tucked the box under my arm, grabbed my keys, and headed out. The autumn light was rich with gold by then, the kind that makes everything look softer. I drove with the window cracked just enough to let in the breeze. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they needed to. Martha's wind chimes were already dancing when I pulled into her driveway. I stood on the porch a moment before ringing the bell. I could see her silhouette through the frosted glass, still wearing her house sweater with the applique tulips near the hem. She opened the door with a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. Lorraine. What a surprise. I held out the box. These came to me, and I thought you might like them. I didn't want them to go to waste. Oh, but are you sure? You don't have to. I want to, I said, cutting gently through her protest. She looked down at the box, then back at me with a nod. Well, thank you. That's kind of you. Kind. That word landed oddly in my chest. It was the kind of word people used when they didn't know what else to say. But it was also the kind of word people only offered when you gave something away without asking for anything in return. I didn't stay long, just enough to see her place the box on the counter with care, like it was something to admire before tasting. Just enough to say, "Take care," before heading back to the car. On the drive home, I kept expecting to feel regret, that maybe I should have kept one more cookie, that maybe, buried under the sugar and starch, there was an actual gesture from my son. But instead, I felt something closer to relief, like I'd just removed a stone from my shoe I didn't realize had been there since morning. Back at home, the kitchen was too quiet. The spot on the table where the box had sat was now empty. I stood there a long time, staring at the wood grain, feeling like I'd let something slip away before understanding it. I opened the fridge, looked at the lone cookie I'd saved. Its sugar had already begun to dull. I closed the door and leaned against the counter, arms crossed, heart oddly steady. I wasn't angry, not yet. That came later. At that moment, what I felt was uncertainty, like I dodged something but didn't know whether it had been danger or reconciliation. And somehow, that ambiguity was worse than either. I ran the dishwasher even though there weren't enough dishes in it, wiped down the counters, swept the back hallway. Tasks that didn't need doing but helped pass time when emotion was a little too large to look at directly. Before I went to bed that night, I checked the fridge one last time. The cookie was still there, unchanged, waiting. It would stay there for several days, and I would stay unsure until the phone rang. But that part comes later. This part? This was the moment I thought I was simply letting go of a box of cookies. I had no idea I was passing along something much heavier, something that would send someone else to the hospital, something that would turn the past 3 years of silence into a threat I never saw coming. And all I'd done was say no thank you. The phone rang at 7:08 a.m. I remember because I had just poured my second cup of coffee. Not reheated, the first one had gone untouched. I'd been staring out the kitchen window, watching a squirrel rip apart a potted plant I gave up on weeks ago. The ring jolted me, not just because it was early, but because almost no one called anymore, especially not from that number. Clara's name lit up the screen, Julian's wife, or at least, that's how I still thought of her, though I hadn't seen her in nearly 2 years. We weren't close, but she had a kindness in her voice once, before distance set in like fog. I let the call buzz once more before answering. Hello? My voice came out thinner than I expected. Lorraine? Her voice was breathless, tight, like she'd been crying but wasn't ready to admit it yet. It's Clara. Martha's in the hospital. I blinked, unsure what I was hearing. She collapsed this morning, Clara continued. We thought it was the flu at first, but she got worse overnight, vomiting, disoriented, confused. Then she couldn't stand up at all. I sat down, hand gripping the edge of the counter. Oh my God, is she stable? They've got her in a room at St. Luke's, Clara said. They're running tests. No one knows anything yet. I could hear background noise through the line. Hospital monitors, someone's shoes squeaking down linoleum, the clipped voice of a nurse calling out orders. It was all too fast and too close. Then Clara said something that pulled the breath from my chest. "She mentioned cookies," she said. "Said you brought her some yesterday." I swallowed. "Yes, I did." "She told the nurses," Clara said slowly, "said they were beautiful, that she'd already eaten a few." Silence opened up between us. "Do you think—" Clara hesitated. "Do you think they could have made her sick?" I didn't answer right away. My mind replayed the moment I'd handed her the box. The way she smiled, the way she placed it gently on the counter like it was porcelain. I remembered brushing off her protests. I hadn't stayed long. I'd thought I was doing something decent, something that let me move on. "I don't know," I said finally. "I didn't eat any myself." There was another pause, this one deeper, heavier. "If you think of anything," Clara said, her voice cracking, "anything at all, you'll tell me, right?" "Yes," I whispered. "Of course." We hung up. The kitchen felt different then, like the light had shifted even though the sun was still rising. I turned slowly toward the fridge and opened the door. The single cookie I'd saved sat untouched in its container, a pale blue flower curling slightly where the icing had dried. I closed the door again and leaned my back against it. "Only you." That's what Julian had said on the phone yesterday when I told him I'd given the cookies to Martha. He'd sounded calm at first, casual even, but when I mentioned giving the gift away, something inside him changed. I heard it in his breath, in the cold way his voice clipped off. "They weren't for her, they were for you, and now—" Martha was in the hospital. I moved through the kitchen without thinking, opening drawers, cabinets, the pantry. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe an explanation, maybe something to convince me I was being paranoid. It was when I opened the trash bin that I saw it. Near the bottom, half tucked under a crumpled paper towel, was a small plastic bottle. Clear, unlabeled. It looked like the kind of bottle you'd get vitamins in, cheap, generic. Nothing about it stood out except for the faint ring of white powder clinging to the inside walls. My hand froze above the trash. For a long second, I just stared at it. Then carefully, I reached in and pulled it out. The cap was still screwed on tight. I turned it over in my hands. No markings, no pharmacy sticker, no supplement label. It wasn't mine. I would have remembered something like this. I hadn't bought vitamins in months, and even then, I always chose the brand with the yellow cap. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it belonged to someone else. Maybe it had been in the house for ages. But no, I'd emptied that bin just the day before. I remembered taking it out when I got home from Martha's, and I hadn't used the trash since. The bottle was new, recently placed, and it had been in my house. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, bottle in one hand, my other still shaking slightly. I didn't feel scared, not exactly, not yet. What I felt was something colder, slower. Like a shadow that had been behind me for years was finally stepping forward into the light. I placed the bottle on the counter, then pulled the cookie container from the fridge. I set it beside the bottle, side by side. One looked innocent, the other empty. But somehow, together, they filled the room with a weight I couldn't shake. Was I the target? Had that box been meant to harm me? Or worse, had I unknowingly handed it to someone else, a woman who had always shown me grace and sent her to the ER with a poisoned smile? I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just stood there, the hum of the refrigerator louder than it should have been. Eventually, I moved to the hallway and opened the old oak cabinet where I kept the emergency binder, the one with insurance forms, utility bills, and old receipts. Tucked between the folders was a business card, Dr. Nicole Hemsley, biochemist. We'd met years ago through a garden club fundraiser. She owed me a favor. I'd never once planned to call it in, until now. I dialed the number with cold fingers. When her voice answered, I didn't explain much, just that I had something that needed testing, quietly. She didn't ask questions, only told me she'd meet me at the back entrance of her lab the next morning, just after 7. After I hung up, I went back to the kitchen and stared again at the cookie in the bottle. I couldn't look at either without feeling something shift in me, A click of understanding I wasn't ready for. Not yet. So I put the bottle into a sealed sandwich bag and locked it in the top drawer of my writing desk. I returned the cookie to the fridge. That night, I didn't sleep. The house creaked the way it always had, but the sounds felt closer somehow. I left the hallway light on. Every time the pipes groaned or the floorboards shifted, I sat up, breath held. I checked the lock on the back door 3 separate times. By morning, I'd already dressed before the sun came up. I didn't eat, didn't make coffee. I just stood at the counter, waiting for the clock to move. I didn't know what was in that cookie yet, but I knew, somehow, that everything was about to change. By dawn, I was already dressed and sitting at the kitchen table with the cookie sealed in one container and the bottle in another, both placed neatly on a folded dish towel like I was preparing to hand them off to a coroner. I didn't know what I expected to hear from Nicole. Maybe just confirmation that I was being paranoid, that this was all coincidence and overreaction, the way we sometimes blame our nerves for seeing too much, when really, we've been ignoring signs for too long. Nicole Hemsley and I had met a decade earlier at a garden fundraiser for the local historical society. She was the kind of woman who wore practical shoes and laughed with her whole face. A biochemist by training, she had worked at a private research lab outside Portland for years, testing everything from soil samples to herbal supplements. We'd stayed in touch loosely, cards at Christmas, the occasional recipe exchange, but I remembered once helping her care for her mother through hospice. A kind of quiet bond forms when you witness someone else carry that weight. She owed me a favor. Not because she had to, but because people like her remember who shows up when things get hard. When I called, she didn't ask many questions. Her voice on the line was calm, clipped, professional. "How fast do you need the results?" she asked. "Fast enough that I don't do something stupid," I said. She didn't laugh. "Come by the back entrance around 7. Don't bring anything you're not ready to leave behind." So I went, drove with the windows rolled up, the containers tucked in a brown paper bag beside me like they were ticking. The lab was tucked behind a medical complex, one of those windowless buildings that felt forgotten. Nicole came out herself, hair still damp, lab coat crisp. Her eyebrows lifted slightly when I handed over the bag. "This the kind of favor I'll regret?" she asked. "I hope not," I said. She nodded once and disappeared through the side door without looking back. I didn't drive away, just sat there in the parking lot, engine off, watching condensation bead on the windshield. My hands were cold, my thoughts colder. And that's when the memories started pouring in. It's strange what the mind holds on to, what gets preserved and what gets warped with time. I always told people Julian was particular. That was the word I used at parent-teacher conferences when explaining why he didn't work well in groups. "He's just particular," I'd say with a soft smile, very focused, very structured. But in truth, Julian was obsessive. At 8, he used to fold his dinner napkins into perfect triangles, would cry if one corner didn't match. At 10, he reorganized the pantry alphabetically and scolded me for putting the pasta under S for spaghetti. At 12, when I bought the wrong brand of ketchup, he refused to speak to me for a week, not out of childish sulking, but out of some deeper conviction that I had violated an unspoken rule. He didn't yell. He didn't slam doors. He went silent, stored it away, let it harden. Once, when he was around 13, I baked cookies for a school fundraiser and forgot that he hated walnuts. He took one bite, spat it into the trash, and immediately scrubbed his mouth raw at the sink, like I'd poisoned him. Back then, I laughed it off. "He's just got a strong sense of taste," I'd tell myself. Some kids are like that. But it wasn't just his taste. It was his need for things to go the way he planned, his need for control. He was brilliant in school, impeccable manners in public. Teachers loved him. But at home, there was a distance I couldn't cross. Even when he was little, he studied people the way other boys studied dinosaurs, watched their movements, memorized responses, measured everything. And somewhere along the way, he started measuring me. The more I tried to connect, the more I felt like I was being evaluated, scored. compared to a standard I never received in writing. After his father died, that distance grew. I blamed grief, blamed puberty, blamed myself. But maybe I should have been paying closer attention. My phone rang just after noon. I was sitting in the kitchen again, hands wrapped around a cup of tea I didn't drink. The mug had gone cold. Nicole's voice came through clear, but lower than usual. "Lorraine," she said, "we ran the standard panels. Then I had them go deeper. There's something in the cookie." My stomach dropped. "What is it?" "Traces of a compound derived from aconitum," she said. "Common name, monk's hood. It's highly toxic, usually absorbed through ingestion, sometimes even skin contact in high concentrations. It's not something that would end up in food accidentally." I said nothing, just let the words land one by one. "It's rare," Nicole continued, "but it's real, and it's in there. I'd stake my license on it." Could it have made someone very sick?" "Yes," she said, "and depending on the dose, worse than that." I felt the floor drop beneath me, not physically, but that internal lurch, like the moment right before a car crash. You're still moving, but the world has already changed. "You said someone ate these," Nicole added more gently now. "Yes," I said quietly. "I gave the box to someone." There was a pause on the line. I could hear her shifting. "I'll write up a full toxicology report," she said, quietly for now, "but I have to ask, are you safe?" "I don't know. If you find anything else," she added, "call me." Immediately. We hung up. I stayed seated for a long time, staring at the refrigerator like it might explain itself. Behind that door was still the one cookie I hadn't touched, the one I saved, not out of sentiment, but suspicion. And now, it felt like a loaded weapon sitting between the milk and the mustard. My son had sent me poison. Whether he meant for me to eat it or for me to give it away, I didn't know. All I knew was that something I once called love had become a calculation, and that somewhere along the way, Julian had stopped seeing me as his mother. He saw me as a variable. That night, I opened the fridge again and stared at the cookie. Its edges had softened slightly. The frosting had dulled. It looked less like a gift now and more like what it was, proof. I didn't eat it. I didn't throw it away. I just closed the door, turned out the light, and waited for morning. Because this wasn't over. And if I was going to survive whatever Julian had started, I needed to stop being his mother and start being a witness. I didn't sleep the night before. The hallway lights stayed on. I sat in my living room long after midnight, half listening to the creaks of the house and the tick of the old wall clock. My tea had gone cold hours earlier, untouched. I kept replaying Nicole's voice in my head, steady and clinical. "It's a aconitine, Lorraine." That cookie wasn't safe. By morning, I wasn't tired. I was wired, sharp-edged and strange, like I'd stepped into a different version of myself. I opened the drawer by the telephone and took out the small digital recorder I'd bought years ago when I thought I might start writing down family stories. I'd only used it once, to interview my neighbor about her garden. Today, I slid fresh batteries in, checked the red light, practiced pressing the record button with my thumb until it felt invisible. It fit easily into the pocket of my wool coat. This wasn't a conversation I wanted to have. It was one I had to. By 10:30, I was pulling onto Julian's quiet street in Portland. Row houses with manicured lawns and neighbors who waved politely but didn't ask questions. The last time I'd been here was after his wedding. I remembered how Clara had tried to welcome me, how Martha had stood next to me during the cake cutting, so I didn't look alone. I also remembered how Julian never really looked at me that day. Not directly, only past me. Today, when he opened the door, he looked surprised, but only for a second. "Mom," he said, voice flat. "This is a surprise." I gave him a tight smile. "I heard about Martha. I wanted to check in, see how she's doing." He stepped aside. "She's still at St. Luke's. Clara's with her now. They think it's a virus or something. Complicated." I nodded, stepping into the house. His kitchen was as sterile as I remembered. Spotless countertops, every item placed like it had been measured. Even the fruit bowl looked rehearsed. 3 apples, 1 banana, no bruises. We made small talk, or something like it. He offered me water. I declined. The recorder was already running in my coat pocket. I kept my voice casual. "I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to talk more the other day," I said, easing myself into one of the bar stools at the counter. "The cookies were beautiful." Julian raised an eyebrow ever so slightly. "Were they?" "I didn't try them, actually. I gave them to Martha," I said, watching his reaction carefully. She was thrilled, said the star-shaped one was her favorite. It was subtle, barely there, but I saw it. His eyes narrowed for just a moment. Then came the pause, too quick, too small for most people to catch, but I wasn't most people. I'd studied this boy my whole life. "Ruth picked the stars," he said. I blinked. I hadn't said which shape she'd eaten, only that she liked one. I tilted my head. "Yes," I said slowly. "She mentioned it." Julian turned toward the sink, rinsing a glass that didn't need washing. His movements were controlled, overly so, like he was trying too hard to seem casual. His back was to me now, but I saw the way his shoulder blades stiffened. "She always did go for the pretty ones," he said. "Aesthetics over substance. That was her thing." He dried the glass with a towel, then set it down exactly at the corner of the drying mat. "You never told me you'd started baking," I said softly. He gave a clipped laugh, more air than sound. "New hobby. Helps me unwind." I let the silence stretch, let the air thicken, then I dropped it. "Where'd you learn to use monk's hood?" He froze. Not dramatically, but the kind of stillness that comes from deep inside, the kind that means something just shifted, even if nothing moved. He didn't turn around. "I don't know what that is," he said too quickly. "Dr. Nicole Hemsley does," I said, my voice quiet, even. "She ran the test. It was in the cookie, Julian." Now he turned, slowly, placed both palms on the counter like he was trying to ground himself. "You went to Nicole," he said, almost amused. "You had the cookie tested?" I had to. His mouth twitched, just the edge. "And what do you think this proves? That someone put a highly toxic compound in a box of cookies and sent them to my home," I said. "That someone knew I might eat them. That someone got angry when I gave them to someone else." Julian shook his head. "You don't know what you're saying. These kinds of accusations, they don't end well, especially without proof." "I think I already have enough," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "You slipped up." He looked at me for a long time, not furious, not scared, something colder, like he was recalculating. "You've always misunderstood me," he said, almost with pity. "No," I said. "I think I finally understand you completely." I stood slowly, reached into my purse just to ground myself, to feel something familiar. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Then I saw it. On the far end of the counter, partially covered by a folded dish towel, was a small bottle. Identical shape, same cloudy plastic, same white residue clinging to the inside. Julian followed my gaze. He moved, too casually, to lean against the counter, blocking my view like he was stretching. "I should go," I said. "I've already taken up enough of your time." He gave a nod, smile returning, thin and false. "Give Martha my best." I didn't look back. Once outside, the air felt sharper. I walked to the car, every nerve alert, hands cold despite the sunlight. I didn't stop the recording until I was inside with the doors locked. Then I sent the audio to Nicole. I didn't listen to it first. I didn't need to. Later that day, I drove to St. Luke's. Martha was still unconscious. Clara sat at her side, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. I told her everything. By the time I left, the sky had darkened and the wind had picked up. I didn't feel better. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt cracked open. That night, I slept on the couch, phone beside me. I left the recorder on the table, red light blinking. It was still blinking when I finally closed my eyes. Because the truth wasn't just out there now, it was recorded. It had a voice, and it was mine. Detective Ethan Mallory called just after sunrise. I was still sitting on the couch where I'd half slept through the night, one hand resting near the recorder like it might vanish if I let it go. When the phone rang, I didn't jump. I just reached for it and answered. "Mrs. Whitford?" His voice was firm, measured. "We've reviewed the audio, the lab results, and the items you submitted. It's enough. We're issuing a warrant this morning." I didn't speak right away. I stared across the room at the window where the early light was just beginning to break through the trees. "So that's it?" I asked softly. "He'll be arrested?" "He'll be brought in for questioning first," Mallory said. "But with what you've provided, yes. We believe we have probable cause to open a formal case." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "Thank you." "We'll keep you updated," he said. "And if anything else comes to light, anything, you call me directly." I hung up the phone slowly, my fingers lingering on the plastic. I knew this moment would come, but I hadn't realized how final it would feel, like something had snapped into place that couldn't be undone. I didn't go down to the station. I didn't want to see Julian in handcuffs or behind glass. I didn't want that to be the last image I carried of him. I already had enough ghosts in this house. Instead, I drove to St. Luke's. Martha had begun to regain consciousness, though she was still disoriented. Clara was sitting beside her, pale and worn down, eyes rimmed with the red of a woman who'd stopped pretending to sleep. She looked up as I walked in. I didn't have to say much. "I told them everything," I said gently. "The lab report, the conversation, the bottle. It's all with the detectives now." Clara nodded slowly. "They came by this morning, said they were bringing Julian in." I sat in the chair beside her, not next to Martha, but near enough to share the weight. Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a small black notebook, weathered, spiral-bound, the kind you find in hardware stores or old glove compartments. "I found this last week," she said, "tucked behind some books in the garage. I didn't think anything of it then." She opened the notebook and turned it toward me. Pages of notes, small clinical handwriting, Latin names of plants, dosage charts, observations, Aconitum napellus, digitalis, Taxus baccata. There were sketches too, diagrams of leaf structures, extraction techniques, even entries about delivery methods, edible compounds, tea infusions, powdered blends. It read like something out of a medical journal or a manual. "He's been studying this for years," Clara said, her voice shaking. "He used a different name online, Dr. Alston. I searched the username. He posted in these obscure herbalist forums. People thought he was a botanist." I turned another page. One section was labeled Controlled Exposure Tests. Beneath it, a list. Body weight, metabolism rate, variable reactions. It wasn't hypothetical. He'd been cataloging results. "I thought he was just dealing with anxiety," she whispered. "He'd spend hours in the garage, said it helped him feel focused." She wiped at her eyes. "I should have known," she said, "but I didn't want to ask. He was getting more distant, but I thought maybe it was stress or burnout or even grief, not this." I didn't know how to comfort her, and maybe that was the point. There's a kind of pain you don't soothe, you just sit with it, like a witness, and that's what I did. Later that day, I went home. The sky was gray, the kind of gray that makes the day feel longer than it is. I didn't turn on any lights. I didn't turn on the TV. I just sat at the kitchen table with one thing in front of me, the last cookie. It had started to harden now, the sugar frosting dulling at the edges. It no longer looked soft or inviting. It looked preserved, like something that had passed from being edible into being something else entirely, a relic. Detective Mallory had given me a clear evidence bag. "You're not required to keep it," he'd said, "but if you'd rather it stay with you for now, for your own reasons, we can log the chain of custody when you're ready." I slid the cookie inside carefully, trying not to break the fragile sugar details. It was a pale blue flower, Violets, maybe, or something that only existed in Julian's version of beauty. I sealed the bag with a firm press of my fingers and stared at it under the kitchen light. It looked heavier than it was. Not for revenge, I thought. Not to relive it, but for clarity. For the day I'd need to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't overreacted, that a mother's instinct, dulled and ignored for too many years, had finally woken up in time. I walked down the hallway and opened the fireproof lockbox I kept in the closet, the one where I stored birth certificates, insurance policies, my late husband's will. I placed the cookie inside, beside the card that had come with the box. "Happy birthday, Mom. Let's start over." I shut the box gently, turned the key, and placed it back on the top shelf. Later that evening, Clara came by. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in 2 days. We sat in the living room without saying much for a while. Sometimes grief doesn't need language. Sometimes you just need someone else to breathe the same air. "I keep going back to things he said," she whispered eventually. "Little things, half jokes, odd questions. He once asked me if I knew what foxglove looked like. I thought it was trivia. He'd quiz me on plant names. I thought he was just eccentric." I didn't interrupt. She needed to let it out. "I loved him," she said. "I still do in some awful fractured way, but I'm afraid of him now." "I know," I said softly. "That's the hardest part. When the fear and love sit in the same room." She started to cry and I let her. We didn't try to solve anything. There was no solution, just the slow unspooling of truth and the ache of what had been missed. Before she left, I handed her a copy of Nicole's report. "If you need this for court," I said. Clara nodded. "Thank you. For everything. For seeing what I couldn't." After she left, I stood in the entryway for a long time, just breathing, just feeling. The evening was still. The porch light flickered on. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Ordinary things. And yet, nothing was ordinary anymore. That night, I didn't dream. I didn't cry. I didn't relive the moment he said, "Only you." What I did was hold on to the one thing I knew to be true. I had survived it. I had looked at the person I once cradled as an infant and seen him for who he had become, not who I wished he still was. And now, finally, I could begin to understand the difference. The air felt different that morning. I couldn't say why. The weather hadn't changed. The sky was still the soft gray of an Oregon fall, the same wind moving through the pine branches out back. But there was a stillness inside the house. A weight, maybe. Or the absence of one. Julian had been taken into custody the day before. No dramatic headlines, no screaming sirens, just a quiet knock on his door. Clara said he didn't resist. He didn't ask why. He simply nodded, put on his jacket, and followed the officers into the car like he was going to an appointment he had set himself. It didn't surprise me. Julian had always believed in preparation. He used to plan his Halloween costumes in July, practice science fair presentations weeks ahead of schedule. When he was little, he would rehearse conversations out loud before birthday parties, deciding what to say if someone complimented his shoes or offered him cake. I don't think he expected to get away with what he did. I think he expected to manage it. That's the part that lives in me now. Not the act itself, but the calculation behind it. The possibility that my son had seen me not as someone to protect, but as a variable to control, a test subject, a boundary to push, and I almost didn't see it. That morning, I stood in the kitchen with the last remaining piece of that box, the cookie I had saved without knowing why. A simple round sugar cookie, now hard at the edges, with blue frosting that had dulled and cracked. The card that came with it lay beside it on the counter, folded once, signed in handwriting I used to know by heart. "Happy birthday, Mom. Let's start over." I ran my thumb over the ink. I'd read those words 100 times, wondered if they were genuine, wondered if there was a version of this story where he had meant it, where the cookies weren't laced with poison, where the gesture had been real, where I had said yes, But reality doesn't change just because we wish it would. And now I knew better. Now I knew the ribbon wasn't forgiveness, it was camouflage. So I took out the fireproof lockbox again, the same one where I had stored my husband's will, the deed to the house, my own power of attorney papers. Things meant to survive damage. Things meant to hold their truth even through flame. I slid the cookie into a fresh evidence bag, labeled it with the date, pressed the seal shut. Then I folded the birthday card just once more and placed it behind the bag, where the words wouldn't be the first thing I saw, where I wouldn't read them before remembering everything that came after. The box clicked when I closed it, a clean, final sound. I set it on the top shelf of my bedroom closet, high enough that I'd need a chair to reach it. I didn't want to see it every day, but I wanted it to be there, because some truths don't go away, and some lessons aren't meant to be filed in the dark. They're meant to be kept, not out of bitterness, but out of memory. I wasn't sealing away my grief. I was preserving my wake-up call. Because here's what I know now. Sometimes survival doesn't come with alarms or red flags. Sometimes it comes with soft blue frosting and a familiar signature. Sometimes the people we raised grow into strangers. And sometimes the people we love most are the ones who force us to choose between their comfort and our own safety. For years, I blamed myself for the distance between Julian and me. Told myself I should have been more patient, more structured, more like the kind of mother he needed. I excused the silence. I made room for his absence. I taught myself not to flinch at holidays when the phone didn't ring. I told myself that unconditional love meant never closing the door. But it doesn't. Unconditional love isn't about tolerating the intolerable. It's about loving someone enough to see them clearly and loving yourself enough to act when clarity arrives. What I almost missed wasn't just a poison, it was the message beneath it. You're not supposed to notice. You're not supposed to ask. You're just supposed to accept what I give you and call it love. And for the first time in years, I didn't. That's what I'll remember. Not the police report, not the headlines, not even the way the light hit Julian's face when he realized I was recording. What I'll remember is the morning I looked at something beautiful and refused to eat it. I didn't destroy the cookie. I didn't smash the card. That's not the kind of justice I believe in. I simply said no more. Not this time. Not again. I didn't tell Clara where I put the cookie. She doesn't need to carry that. She has enough of her own weight to bear now, but she knows I kept it, and that was enough. Before she left yesterday, she hugged me. It was awkward at first. Two women who had once shared a family dinner table, now bound together by what we almost lost. But when she pulled back, her eyes were softer, brighter somehow. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "You don't have to," I told her. "You just have to stay awake." Because that's what this really is. A story about waking up, about looking long and hard at something that's supposed to feel familiar and choosing to see it for what it really is, and walking away anyway. So yes, I kept the cookie. Not to forgive, not to forget, but to remember. To remember that instinct is real. That silence is not always love. That danger doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And that sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is to say, "I see it now, and I'm still here." Some stories aren't told to forgive. They're told so someone else knows. You're not alone. If you've ever felt the weight of silence from someone you love, if you've ever held a gift that looked like love but felt more like warning, then this story was meant for you. My name is Lorraine Whitford. And if you're still listening, maybe you've faced the same choice I had to make, choosing yourself over a connection that quietly became dangerous. Here on Renvenge Zinnia, we share truths most people never say out loud, quiet betrayals, private awakenings, the kind of endings that don't always come with closure, but still bring peace. If that resonates with you, I hope you'll stay. Tap subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. Real voices, real wounds, and the strength to keep going. And if you know someone who's still holding on to something that no longer serves them, send this their way. Because sometimes one story, at the right moment, is enough to pull someone back into the light.